And it's 2022, and what better way to start 2022 than with another talk about the upcoming things that are coming to WoW in the 9.2 patch. Actually, today we really have a discussion planned and really want to address a lot of topics that you guys have suggested in the comments and feedbacks and everywhere else, not just on YouTube. So it's going to be a really cool talk. And today, a special day as well, we're going to have a new guest, which you might have seen if you've watched our, let's say, Shadow Priest podcast as well.
Let's just say Shadow Priest.
And if you've played Shadow Priest in any capacity and were interested at any point in time at, feedback in the community, you might have seen Publik, and you probably should have seen Publik by now. But yeah, the guest is Publik without...
And hoping Publik is going to stay for much more episodes to come as well. But for you who don't know who Publik is, if you're not a Shadow Priest or I don't know what planet you're from, Publik, tell a little bit about yourself, and I think we can carry on from there.
Hey folks, so my name is Publik. I've been around the WoW community for a number of years now, since I think Legion or so in the Shadow Priest community. So I've been writing a bunch of guides. I do a lot of the SimC module work for Shadow Priest, as well as writing as much feedback as I can to hopefully get the spec in what I consider like the best spot it can be. Happy to talk about general systems today, not necessarily Shadow Priest, but I can definitely give that perspective today, so it'll be fun.
I mean, we all know Guiltyas by now, Mandl, Panthea, and Wordup. People who are following the podcast are kind of familiar with, but if you don't know who they are, you can watch the previous episodes. We did a lot of introductions for them now. But we do have, really important stuff to talk about here. And I guess we can kick it off with...
What do we have on the menu?
Before actually starting recording, obviously, spirits kind of got a bit lifted because we kind of always do this, right? We talk about topics and stuff, and then
we have a pre-show and an after-show that, let's say, some of them cannot make it on social media platforms.
Oh yeah, definitely. So here's the thing: one of the, I would say, popular topics in the latest weeks, at least, is the split in value of double legendaries and set bonuses between specs. I know a lot of the folks from here have the different opinions on this, and but I don't know, we can start off with Guiltyas because he's always the first I see on my screen. I don't know if it's on your screen as well, and he was always the first to have his camera on. I'm sorry, Publik, you'll be second, okay? And then we'll carry on. So Guiltyas, what's your take on this, man?
On set bonuses?
So the split value between double legendaries and the set bonuses.
Well, we've talked somewhat about double legendaries before. I think a major point about double legendaries is the fact that it's going to completely fuck covenant balance for some specs. I know we've talked about this before, but it's absolutely worth stressing that it's monumental. Because some of the covenant legendaries are just one shot and shipped, and they just don't fit general purpose content, which when it's a legendary you're going to be using in all content now is actually a huge problem. So that's something we've talked about before, which is a huge problem. Obviously, set bonuses are still kind of a bit screwy because we don't know how they're going to be obtained. We don't know what kind of rate they're going to be obtained. There's a lot of questions about them.
I think that's another big concern. If the gear drop rates will remain the same, it's going to be really interesting starting off the new tier of the raid. Basically,
oh god, yeah.
Up until people will get their tier sets and stuff, and acquiring the two legendaries, that will remain the same old thing, right? Did they mention anything that it will change? Just crafting it.
Well, we don't know how you unlock two legendaries yet.
Oh, right.
We don't know if we're going to have a progress. We don't know when it's going to come.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of question marks for sure over there.
Yes.
Right. Now, what about you, Publik? What's your stance on this?
Yeah, I mean, largely agree, right? I mean, I think covenant balancing right now, I think is the best it's been this expansion because you can, freely swap covenants. So balancing problems somewhat go out the window when that happens. But the power level between them, if your, favorite covenant as a Shadow Priest is Kyrian, for example, you're 20% DPS behind the best covenant in 9.2. So, and 20% is a massive DPS loss, right? And at the start of the expansion, it was 2%. So the power level has just crept up, and especially now, the way that they've done double legendaries, if we get them for progress, right? you get one Covenant legendary and then one other legendary. Well, the problem with that is the Covenant legendaries, I think for almost every spec, are just kind of all over the place. So some of them are really strong. Some of them are just terrible. A lot of that has to do with Covenants in the first place being balanced were difficult, and that, you know, some Covenant abilities for some specs were like 2% of your damage. Others were like 10 or 15% of your damage. So a Covenant legendary that buffs those abilities is directly dependent on that balancing. And I think it all kind of goes screwy, as Guilty mentioned. Like it's there's so many variables up in the air of things changing things. We saw the same thing last expansion at the end of the expansion. When you keep adding systems on top of systems, the amount of variables that you multiply together just kind of make things go kerplow a little bit. So yeah, unfortunately, Covenant balance is going to probably look worse at 9.2 for a lot of people. And again, a lot of that's coming with double legendaries, and then whatever your tier set bonus is probably favors some build that another legendary or Covenant setup has, as opposed to others. So it's going to be, and this is no shot to the developers, right? It's going to be really hard to make any tier set, you know, be the same DPS regardless of Covenant for some specs, and that's they're showing that with, you know, what we've seen so far on PTR. They've been doing, I think, a relatively good job of trying to iterate on tier sets, but we just need a lot more, I think, to get to a healthy spot. So, and we're just waiting for all that to happen, I think.
Fair points. What about you, Mandl? Care to have a take on this, or in the same boat?
Mostly agree as well, but there's also a finer point, which is that the Covenant legendaries themselves, when they were designed, it feels like all the different developers that were doing them had different goals. So like take Hunter, for instance, where the Kyrian legendary is basically very much a simple legendary. So basically whenever you use your Covenant ability, everybody gets 10% crit. The Panthea Necrolord one tried to cover weaknesses in the Covenant. And the Night Fae one is just kind of weird. So you have one that basically emphasizes on the strength of the Covenant, which is Kyrian. It basically adds even more value to the cooldown. And two Covenant legendaries, which are basically, well, you do a bit more AoE damage, when the Covenant itself was losing 30 to 40% by just existing on AoE damage. So instead of emphasizing strengths in these cases, they basically try to cover weaknesses, and as a result, the Covenant becomes a non-choice, because suddenly you're not good at anything. You don't even have a niche. Whereas on other specs, take for instance, I really like that topic, but Panthea Boomy plays to the spec's strength marvelously. Like every legendary should be like this. And all that is just going to explode, and it's going to reduce the Covenant choice to basically nothing for almost every spec.
I mean, this has been creeping up in most of the discussions about, you know, specs and balancing them. I think there was a point where Ian actually said that they would prefer to buff underperforming things rather than nerf. And you mentioned Panthea Boomy, you know, playing into his strength. That's a very good example, but I don't think they stuck to their guns on that. Panthea, what do you think about this, man?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much similar thoughts to what the others had. My kind of main worry is what happens in the raid when we get double legendaries. That's going to be a huge power spike for some specs, not much for many. How is the raid going to be tuned? Is it going to be assuming that, you know, on average, you're going to get like, 5% per person? But what if you stack people that get 10, 12% more damage? That is the raid going to be trivial for better compositions of raid, more so than it would be in the past. And then you've also got tier sets on top of that. And they're also in a big wild spectrum of power as well. So combine them too. How is the raid going to be tuned?
Have to.
With that tuning as well, and we talked about this before the show, and Mandl, I think, brought this up, we also won't have Shards of Domination going into the next raid. So not only will you be missing out on your double Lego or trying to get your tier set, you're also losing, you know, a 15%, 17% power from not having your Shards of Domination set anymore as well, which is massive.
Yeah.
We've had this happen in the past in Uldir, where we lost the reorigination array. And that led to a completely screwy balance in Battle for Dalazar lore, at least until nerfs happened. So it's very likely that this will happen again.
And then the
throwback
kind
to
of
first boss.
With the legendary and tier set things, and I may go on a little bit, so cut me off if I go too long, because I have a lot of
Go,
takes on
Wordup.
all of them. But right now, especially what Mandl said, where it seems that they had different goals, I think you can really clearly see if you go down certain classes, especially ones that you haven't played, but if you look at them, there are some that were designed and tailored as unique bonuses to make something better. Whereas you can see other ones where they realized, well, we need to have a legendary for everyone, for every covenant, but we haven't got an idea for it, so we'll just grab whatever. Torghast is like the obvious example where they just started pulling things from Torghast and throwing that on a legendary. And it obviously doesn't translate to the real world and be useful, so those legendaries never got crafted. And that skews the covenant balance really badly when they almost fixed it with 9.1.5, letting everyone pick whatever. Now it's suddenly back into flux. At the same time that you add set bonuses that have got wildly skewed values between covenants like Publik said. So they have got some examples. I think Havoc's recent blue post was a really, really clear example of they had an idea for a bonus that worked really well for one covenant, but it didn't work for any other. They went out of their way to make it a boring bonus, but a bonus that now works for everyone, regardless of the situation, which is a good thing. And then you've still got some bonuses that exist where they have colossal value in a specific covenant that cuts out the other ones, which is very bad. And they also skew very hard into one direction of gameplay. Like it's a pure single target bonus that only works with Night Fae, as an example. Or it's a pure AoE bonus that only works with Panthea. That's really bad as a compounding bonus. And the fact that we don't know when we get double legendaries also adds big questions as to some of those combinations enable playstyles. And if you don't know whether you're going to have it or not, that could be the make or break as to whether or not you can interact with a certain part of a fight, because you can't go for that covenant that can turn that on.
Yep.
You had a good example for Shaman particularly, didn't you?
There's a lot of examples for Shaman right now, because obviously it's compounded by enhancement having like a borderline expansion level rework in this pack. But when you have things like Elemental Conduit for Panthea existing, that effectively enables burst AoE as an option for the spec. But until you get both the Covenant Legendary and another one, that build doesn't work. It needs both of them. So if you don't know whether or not you're going to have them, that means that you don't even know whether it's even relevant for progress purposes. It'll be relevant down the line for Mythic Plus, which is good, obviously, because that's one of the holes that the spec has. But it is really important to know, how are we going to adjust around having these if we don't get them in time? That means that we might just be fundamentally flawed, and there is still only one Covenant option.
I was just going to say, I think these are really good points on why I think feedback is super important. And I think not only giving feedback, but also Blizzard iterating on feedback. I think this is something we've talked about in the past, in general with Blizzard, but I think they've shown over the last couple of weeks that they have started iterating on tier sets, which is good. I think my concern, and I'm sure everyone here on this call, is, do we have enough time to keep iterating on things before things come out in a relatively broken state, or whatever you want to say, and kind of give everyone enough time, because we have seen some iterations of tier sets or legendaries, very well that have done well. Like Shadow Priest went from pure single target to now it is AoE as well, and that came directly from feedback. So we know they're listening. I just don't know if we have enough time.
I think it's big concern, because the majority kind of pointed the release date somewhere at the end of February. I know the more realistic, and I would say maybe more acceptable tuning wise, would be somewhere in March. But in terms of the business side of things, they're kind of forced to release it in February. So that's one thing. But I do want to go back to the Shards of Domination thing, because I don't know if we underlined it enough. So in 9.2, we're not going to have any Shards of Domination anymore. As much as we hated this system, it did represent a big chunk of our power. And as I said in the beginning of the podcast, when you go into the new raid, or in the new season of Mythic Plus, you'll be fucking. It will feel similarly to how you feel when you move on for a 0.3, 0.5 patch to a new expansion. You're gonna be very hollow bones while starting. So just to underline, like, the big concerns right now are how and when do people get double legendaries? How will the gear drop rate work? Will it remain the same? For me at least, that's a big concern. I'll just put a parenthesis here. I still haven't got my Edge of Night daggers on my rogue, and I've been like doing a mythic on Paintsmith, but doing tons of heroic runs, LFGs, whatever. I still haven't got my fucking.
And there are new daggers in 9.2.
Yeah, that too.
I think maybe
when you talk about the shards, I think the thing is that everyone remembers Stat Squish expansion. Like, you remember going into Warlords, or old people remember going into Warlords and getting squished for the first time. And then you also remember getting squished going into BFA, you got squished going into Shadowland. It doesn't feel good, even though it's reasonable to do it, it doesn't feel good. This time you're getting a squish mid-expansion with the shards going away, where you'll wake up tomorrow and you just do less damage in the new ring. And that's very surprising. It's very hard to quantify how much you're going to lose until you go and experience it, which sucks as well. So at least in this situation, when it comes to the feedback point that Publik made, they are actively responding to feedback all the time, and they are actually iterating on bonuses, whereas with shards, they were testable really, really late, and they had to panic buff a lot of things to the point where they got so strong that they are now excessive. And everyone knows it, because we all look at the tuning in Sanctum, everyone blew up in damage because the we can't nerf, we can only buff thing is true most of the time, unless there's an extreme outlier. And sometimes it's better to nerf. But I think generally speaking, it's fine. I just know that Mandl and Panthea have a thing about the tank balance right now that they might want to chime in on.
Yeah, but first I'm going to make a point regarding the Shards of Domination and how they're going to be disabled. Because it's also going to lead to a very nasty psychological effect on some people. When the shards get disabled, there will be a brief period in time when the best gear that you can replace them with is stuff with regular sockets. So it's going to incentivize people to basically pick vaults in advance in order to replace those items for a couple of weeks at the very least. That's a really unhealthy situation to be in, because it means that you're going to have to make very quick short-term decisions, and you're going to feel that you need to make them, whereas in reality they will likely not matter in the long term. Unless, of course, gear acquisition stays what it is. And yeah, regarding set balances for tanks, everything's all over the place, basically. You have Brewmaster and Protection Warriors that are basically target count independent. Then you have Vengeance Demon Hunter that keeps iterating. And Guardian Druid keeps iterating as well. It's still kind of unclear. It looks really strong, though. And then you have Protection Paladin and Blood Decay, which are target count dependent, in that one of them works off block and the other one works off parry, which is insane for Mythic Plus and really, really, really bad for Raid.
Yeah, I just wanted to note in about the really bad for Raid part. So the Protection Paladin one really focuses on block. Like, when you block, you have a chance to fire off a judgment. That's the 4-piece bonus. You think, oh, great, yeah, I'm going to be blocking loads of stuff. But you look at one of the raid tests for this week, had a 6-minute pull on Skolex. It meleeed me 33 times in that entire period. The rest of the time it was casting, it was throwing out dots, it was throwing out casts on other people. And then I'm only tanking half of the time. And then a third of the time of when I block, which is a further 40% of that half, and then 33% of the 40 of the half is what I'm firing back from my 4-piece. So it comes down to, you know, what's the point of having the 4-piece? I'll just sit on 2-piece. That's great for me.
Yeah, it gets even crazier when you realize that, at least for Blood DK, for instance, the only thing that is parryable in Raid is typically auto attacks, and that's it. For Prod Paladin, at least, if the set ends up working the right way, you might be able to proc it off Holy Shield, but yeah, even that is not even that much more. Like, it feels like the sets were designed just with Mythic Plus in mind, or they were assuming that everything can be blocked, everything can be parried, everything can be everythinged, basically.
I don't think that's just a specific concern though there. I think there's quite a lot of bonuses that are very one direction. Like for example, the enhancement one is very much purely a single target, one and done, like straight down the line. Built a bonus. It doesn't really do anything for AoE whatsoever, so it doesn't help Mythic Plus. So the excitement part is what you're going to gain from the covenants and the legendaries in Mythic Plus.
But I think that's the question, right? Is like, where do they want tier sets to lag? Because I think this is the first time we've had tier sets with Mythic Plus in a state where I think Legion's Mythic Plus, when we had tier sets, I don't think they really expected Mythic Plus to be that popular. But now we're in a state where, you know, Mythic Plus is as popular or in kind of in that same competitive state as raiding and PvP. But we have one tier set for all three forms of content, right? And I think it's clear that it's really hard to design one tier set that all three forms of the game are happy with and even work in all three forms of the game. And it's going to be really hard to make all three kind of sides happy, if that makes sense.
If I was to be brutal about this one really quickly, I think that what people expected, where they wanted set bonuses that were going to be really cool and flashy and exciting, or latched into something cool. With all of these other systems going on right now, obviously in the future that can change when they remove them, but with all of those others going on, it was probably a healthier and better direction to go, to just have boring set bonuses that at least do something all the time or contribute somewhere, instead of having ones that have to be like, you know, summons a monster and it does a load of damage to one target and blows up in a massive explosion somewhere. Maybe it should have just been when you press a button, you gain 10% damage for a bit.
So Shards of Domination, is that what you're saying?
Kind of, yeah. It's almost like they've designed themselves with so many other things in the way, in flux, that we maybe should have had bonuses that were a little more dull.
Yeah.
Well,
Bear in mind, a dull bonus does not need to be something that you don't interact with. There are some very, very good set bonuses from the past that were like boring one-liners on the tooltip that promoted very healthy, engaging gameplay. And that worked across everything. Like Legion had a couple of those. Some of them probably too far on the extreme.
I mean, there's a pretty big like mix as well. Some of the set bonuses are fairly dull.
Yeah, but dull is fine as long as it's not dull the entire time for one class. It's completely okay.
Yes,
it comes across like they didn't identify the specs that already have a lot going on.
Yeah,
and they designed bonuses that are also a lot more going on, when maybe the ones that were already complicated should have had something a bit more simple.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like a fairly common issue with Blizzard, though.
I'm still kind of confused as to why they refuse to give a Mythic Plus basically their own set piece or item effect or something like this, because that would be a really good way to incentivize Mythic Plus gear as well. Make something that works in Mythic Plus for Mythic Plus, let people collect that and have fun with that. The same way we used to have PvP set bonuses back in, like, even back in Burning Crusade, Wrath, and all that. Like, we had sets that were designed for PvP, that worked in PvP, and worked really well in PvP, by the way.
And I think that would somewhat solve the balancing problem, right? Like, we wouldn't have to say, like, hey, guys, we really need some AoE component on our raid set bonus because we like to do dungeons with it, right? You know, they could just balance the Mythic Plus set bonus for Mythic Plus, right? And that kind of, but obviously that means they have to create, you know, 50 whatever more tier sets, which is a lot of work. So,
does the Mythic Plus version need to be class specific or spec specific?
That's true.
I personally don't think so.
Yeah, it could be generic. Yeah, that's a good point. Or like have one for tanks, one for healers, one for DPS.
Yeah.
Well, even if you
there's a counterpoint.
Legion has that example. You had some of those like 2-piece bonus sets that just crit proc, and that was really useful. Those kind of things, they can just be universal, but you just restrict them to only working in Mythic Plus.
I mean, as a counterpoint, I think that having things split off and only working in certain parts of the game is actually really bad for the game. I don't think that they should be encouraged to isolate different parts of the game. I think you should be encouraged to play multiple parts of the game.
I don't think they need to isolate it, but at least you could
mandatory.
But you could balance it, right, to where you'd say like, okay, yeah, you can use the Mythic Plus set in raid. It's just it's not balanced for single target damage, so maybe that's not what you want to run, right? But and they could kind of, and same thing with PvP. Like the PvP set bonus could buff things that, you know, maybe spells you don't typically use in raiding, so, you know, wouldn't be used. But I think, yeah, I mean, they can kind of accomplish that same thing, because I do agree ultimately it you know, it would be nice if, like, hey, there is a more AoE, like the ENR fight, for example, where it's like, yeah, this is kind of like a trash pull boss, right? It would be nice, like, oh yeah, I'll throw my Mythic Plus set bonus here to help clear trash better, or whatever it is, right?
You can
Trash in both ways
also
in one.
amplify the effect. That's another thing. And that's one of the things that, at least personally,
that
I
works
think the
better.
Shards of Domination effect was good. Like the whole 3-piece set bonus that only worked in the raid was a really good idea. It needed more description on the tooltips and it needed more polish in general, but the fundamental idea was good. Having basically an extra effect that rewarded you for having raid gear in raid gear, or raid gear in raid content, rather.
Yeah, and the gems were also nice in Mythic Plus to be like, hey, I actually do kind of want a little bit extra shielding or healing here, so I'll, you know, swap out those gems that. And the gems are a much smaller part of your damage. Like the set bonus that was only activated in raid was the big part we liked, but, you know, the gems, even at like a small level, were nice to run in non-raid content as well. So yeah, totally agree.
But like in those situations, you could as well have designed domination set bonuses that were only active in Mythic Plus, that were more Mythic Plus oriented, and then by extension PvP oriented ones. You know, instead of proccing your main stat, it reduces the cooldown of your interrupt or your CC or whatever for PvP. That would be way more interesting, and it gives them something to go for in a gear set where they can still use the other gear set. It's just not the best gear set.
I cannot believe we're praising shards now. What does this come to?
I was going to say, yeah, like,
Well,
Shards had two problems. They were parasitic design and the acquisition rate was crap. Everything else was good about them.
And, sorry, they were also undercooked.
yes.
The what?
Quite extremely. They definitely needed more time in the oven with actual testing than what we ended up with.
Balancing was off. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
think
do bear in mind, they showed up a week before that, and the upgrade actually got hard fixed on live rather than being
That's
tested
true.
on PTR. So, you know.
was a little bit zigzaggy with the patch, but I think what you guys are saying is fairly legit. The realistic development of the gearing system would be a tier set for every type of content. I can see why they wouldn't have done it this time around, because then you would have to have questions like, well, do you want the 2-piece set from the dungeon and the raid, and then it there will be like cross balance issues as well. So I'm not sure exactly how they will implement it, but realistically, going into 9.2, seeing as how they're kind of doing at least 1 or 2 tier sets reworks, or at least buffs or nerfs every week, they're probably going to address a lot more getting closer to 9.2. What do you guys think, or what do you guys think should be the way that they would approach all of this going into 9.2? I can see a world where they keep shards into the game, but nerf their effects to like something like 50% or whatever to the new raid, or nerf, like you guys mentioned, nerf the raid entirely to compensate the fact that you're not going to have shards anymore. But what do you guys think should be the way to go into 9.2 tier sets legendaries? Seeing as we haven't heard anything about the double legendaries, I would imagine they're keeping it on the download to figure out exactly what are the problems now, and maybe use them to fix potential issues, maybe potential issues with shards. Although I hardly see them being available day one in 9.2 without any grind, just to compensate the fact that you're losing the shards, because that would take away from the core of the game of grinding for stuff and engagement metrics. But yeah, what do you guys think would be the likely or
I
the
have a hard
ideal?
line
Wordup,
on that.
Wordup,
I
can
have
I go?
a hard line. But yeah, you go.
Go for it.
Okay. This is the one time we keep on complaining about aura buffs. This is the one time where they could actually be used productively. Estimate how good the shards were, aura buff every spec. Job done. Nobody loses anything, but the shards go away.
Oof. I don't know if that'll work.
I think the hard line is if you're going to turn shards off, which is totally fine. I don't disagree with turning them off, because they've been obviously extremely difficult to balance across the line. I think that in exchange, you make double legendaries be something that is active before you even step into the raid, and that's the way that you like give someone something where they feel like there's something new that probably shows up at least a bit, not all, but a bit of the loss that you're going to have. And that's the thing that they give. Then the tier bonuses come on top.
I think you could also say, hey, normal and heroic is going to be balanced for you not having double legendaries or tier sets or shards of domination, and normal and heroic will just be at that level. And it won't be until mythic where we're like, okay, yeah, now your power level needs to be, you need a tier set or you need double legendaries, and they could delay it that way.
Yeah, but then you run into the perfecto problem again.
You feel like you've lost something, whether or not it's tangible. I think that if they announced double legendaries as a flagship feature of the patch, like day one, in that opening post, they said you're going to get double legendary. So if that's the case, if it's that important that you want to put them in, why not just give it to people straight away? They don't have to hem and haw about whether or not they're going to have it available for something. You just give it to them as like the compensatory, you haven't got shards anymore, but here's your new power thing. Go nuts.
You've already got multiple things you're going to need to farm for. Again, they don't need to like stack it on and on and on. You're going to have to farm for gems again, presumably, for tier sets. You're going to have to farm the new system for all that stuff. They don't need to lock everything behind a farm. They can just give us something.
Yep. There's a fair chance that the tier sets themselves might be, well, invisible to most people for a while due to the general loot system, basically.
Because we don't know how they drop. We don't know if they're going to be tokens. We don't know if they're going to be pushed to you,
Yep. It gets
That's a
even
very,
worse than
very
that because
big problem.
the last precedent where we had tier sets and we had personal loot, you received the tier set, like the tier set piece for your class.
Yeah.
And it was also impossible to trade it until you had another copy of that exact same piece. So if that's
that was also the era where you could turn it onto master loot and you could distribute it if you wanted to. Now we don't have that option. And you got tier tokens by doing this, which is also important. Whereas if you were on personal loot, you got the actual already made pieces. So like if you got a Vanquisher, like if you wanted the equivalent of a Vanquisher token, like suppose you have, 15 Vanquisher equivalent classes. So you have, in your raid, you have 15 of a mix of Druid, Rogue, Death Knight, whatever. If you're on personal loot and you happen to have 14 Druids and 1 Rogue, the Rogue will not be able to get a set piece if the equivalent drops for any of the Druids. Whereas with Master Loot, it wasn't a problem. It simplified gear acquisition and it enabled people to get the sets faster, which we will not have this time. That sets up a really big problem as well with like the distribution of specs and roles in a raid. If you're like the token warrior in the raid, the only reason you're there is for battle shout, and that's it. No one else in the raid is a warrior. Then you're on your own. If you're the shadow priest, but your raid has 2 healers and they're both priests, that means that there's now 3 chances for you to get it every week. But if you have no priest healers, then that means you're on your own. What happens if you're a druid where you've got a guardian, a balance, a feral, and the resto? That means you've got 4 chances.
Dude, what happens if you're the token demon hunter and you're just brought in for 5% magic?
And I think this is and everyone's experienced this to some level in 9.1 with the Shards of Domination system, right? Like everyone needed their 3 pieces to activate their set. And it was like 3 specific slots until they eventually added it to other slots. And now this problem is effectively just worse than that, right? Because you need 4 slots for your 4 set. And this is kind of like amplifying all the issues with personal loot and master loot. I think one of the reasons that raiders and guilds loved master loot was like predominantly because of tier sets. And this problem specifically, let's say you already have, 3 pieces of heroic Shards of Domination. Well, if you get, a helm in Mythic, but someone still doesn't have their 3 set, it would have been great to just give them their 3 set rather than you getting a small heroic to Mythic upgrade. Like these kinds of loot problems will just happen on a larger scale next patch, unless they change how tier sets are dropped or whatever, or give us master loot back, which is also an option. So.
Well, there's like a lot of misconceptions with how master loot used to get used as well. A lot of people seem to think it was so that people could have a lot of corruption and just super juice one person. But most of the time it was really simply just, we got a lot of pieces and one person only needs 1. And it's come now and we need to fill that gap. We give that person that one, they get a load from it and they're really happy. And then the rest of the loot goes out to everyone, totally normal. Obviously, you have the niche ones where you hyper focus on a super broken bonus, which is borderline the problem of the bonuses being too strong. But most of it was just like a stopgap or a failsafe for if someone was getting absolutely fucked by loot.
Yeah, because if you're on personal
bear
loot
in
and you loot your first 4 pieces and you're like, hey, great, I have my 4 set. Then the next boss and you get your 5th piece. You're like, oh, well, I didn't need this, right? Like, why, like, what, and someone in your raid doesn't even have their 2 set yet. Like, that's going to feel really horrible. And, that's,
It's going to happen for sure as well. Like,
It's gonna happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's just going to happen. Pretty sure everyone's raid will have that happen. Someone's get super lucky.
We had that happen quite a few times this tier. I actually wrote a community council post about it, about personal loot trading restrictions. Because we had people with domination items on normal, and then they loot it on heroic, and they can't trade it. And it's much more of a power gain for someone else than themselves, but the system is forcing them to keep it.
Yep.
Or even worse, in some cases, you had people who were very lucky and they got 3 unholy shards back to back, but they didn't get an activator for unholy. And then the people who had no shards, or they had like 3 frost shards or 3 blood shards, they got an unholy activator. Doesn't matter to them because they can't turn it on. But the guy who can hasn't got the item to turn it on anyway. So everyone is unhappy at that point.
I even had one where I was in heroic. I looted a chest from the start of the raid, and then I looted a second chest from Sylvanas. Couldn't trade the Sylvanas chest, but luckily I still had the trade timer on the first one because I learned my mistakes from the other incident.
What a champ.
Do you guys think it's realistic that they take the Nathria weapon tokens into consideration, maybe use them as
They have to, right?
I wish,
They,
man, but
they
won't.
have to, but they will not.
I take it even further. It shouldn't just be Nathria weapon tokens. The token system has to be something that they expand to almost everything.
Trinkets,
Like
too,
trinkets,
probably.
weapons, tier, tokens across the board. Tokens make everything better. They work
It does. I think it does
fantastic in
confuse things a
Hellfire.
bit more, but yeah.
It's the kind of thing where if you label the token correctly, so if you want to keep the last 3 bosses have higher item level loot, they have a different token and they're different name, look different vendor. All the other stuff, you can throw those all over the place and you go to a vendor and you turn them in. Because we don't need any more of this, like, there needs to be a lore explanation for why someone's carrying a certain pair of gloves that's named this way. Because no one notices, end of the day. They might pretend they do, but they don't.
Dude, it's even really inconsistent. Like, doesn't Sylvanas drop a shield?
Yes.
Yes, she does.
But she carries
It's like
one in
a
her pocket.
shoulder piece or something. Don't fucking question it.
The Ranger General of Silvermoon does not carry a polearm, but carries a shield. Go explain that one.
She uses it for bobsledding.
But I think that the loot tokens, maybe just for tiers, maybe for more items, can be a realistic way to implement them. I don't know how they view it, but from a functionality perspective, I feel like this might be a more realistic outcome. And it sounds like it could solve the majority of these issues, both trading issues, acquisition issues as well. And obviously you can just make them so that they don't have a set eye level to them, although they're tradable for a specific eye level item. And that way they can bypass it's a higher eye level. I got the loot token from the first boss, and I cannot trade the last one because it's a higher eye level item or something like that. Maybe they can use that. You guys think that may be the more realistic way of approaching this? Maybe solve more issues with one thing?
I think the number of things that you fix with tokens in one swoop is so high because it fixes the vault, because no longer are you picking an item or hunting for one specific item. You're buying a token, then that token leads to the one item that you really want. It fixes the really bad problem of if you've only got one item that's really important from one boss in the week where you get one chance, those tokens you could spread it out so there's 3 chances to get, and then you can trade it around. So that means that you don't feel like there's only one boss that you care about and the rest of the raid is pointless. All of those things that are super important to making someone feel like they want to clear the raid. They don't just want to clear one boss and that's it, week over, see you next week.
Yeah, I mean, I think bottom line, I think it would do a lot of good in Blizzard's favor. I think we need a blue post on gearing in 9.2 and then gearing and beyond, because I think it's clear that gearing is one of the most important. We talk about systems all the time, but how gearing works and how gear acquisition is done as a system is probably the most important thing in the game, and I think it's clear that it's due for some overhaul or refresh, or just needs more attention, I think, because every expansion, it keeps causing this kind of frustration as we get new systems and new pieces, and it's just not hitting the mark, I think.
It's the regression problem where things almost get fixed and then we go backward.
Yeah.
To take one step back, like the whole gearing and loot in general is probably even like it's at the core of any RPG. So
it's like the system for the game.
It's the second system where the first one is your class, basically.
Oh, right. I forgot. They don't touch that anymore. I forgot.
I think the other big thing as well is that when you make these items be so rare or so single one hit chance to get, it makes people less excited to get a really cool item design, because it just means they know they're going to spend 2 months waiting to get it. And they get
it's
it
relief, right? It's
relief instead of
versus
excitement.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sad, you know, like when I finished Shards of Domination, I was like, oh, thank goodness I'm done. You know, like yeah.
Someone should see Jathis design and be like, that's super awesome. I'm really excited to get this item. But when they actually look at it, they go, right, yeah, that is really cool, but I'm not going to get it for ages. And they're resigned to knowing that's the case. Whereas if it was more free, give it out kind of thing, it encourages them to make cool items, and people want cool items. And just put them in players' hands. They play with it. They like it.
I think Marcelina's example of not getting the rogue daggers is a really good example about how to make like a really cool thing that is like with the gear acquisition. And I think we can take this in.
Do you know I wanted to play sub rogue just because there was some loot for rogues at the end boss? Do you know that? I decided like way back and say, okay, I'm gonna main sub rogue just because of those fucking daggers. And I got my Jathis on my fucking warrior punk.
Loot person.
Sorry,
calling word or.
Yeah, I'm a loot whore, yeah.
The thing is, I think when it comes to gearing, maybe the biggest lesson that they could learn, or maybe they have already learned it from Shadowlands, is acquisition. Because we did have the overhaul on the Great Vaults, and we did have the domination gear that some of them kind of worked outside of the raid because we had to have a power outside of the raid. So I guess they figured out, let's just let one of each, but not the set. And now we're going into 9.2, which poses at least about 2 problems regarding gear and everything else. So potentially in 10.0 they're gonna fix a lot of this issue, but until then we still have to contend with the 9.2. And if we're gonna look at the past history, let's say 8.3, where although it came like halfway through the patch, came the point where they said, okay, fuck it, let's just give them all. And we had the corruption vendor, albeit on a rotation. But I have a feeling that they could just like rip more cords in 9.2 and just say, okay, just give them loot tokens, just let them get the items that they want. And I really hope that this, or at least they use this mindset in some degree and not make it so cumbersome. And I think we can move to the topic of like endgame systems and exactly how necessary is to grind for something.
I have one last point.
Go for it.
The Borderlands way, where like instead of tuning things to be completely balanced and like just trying very hard to make one item or a couple of items that are slightly better than the rest, as they do right now, or massively better than the rest in some cases. Like I'm particularly looking at some Mythic Plus trinkets. I wish all of them were just insane in their own way. Like where we have trinkets like Pulsating Stoneheart in Mythic Plus, which has there is no way you can make a use case for it. Just rework it, make it fun.
Yeah, it's a big issue with gear in general.
Yeah.
Some stuff just exists, that like seemingly just exists just so you end up farming the same, like it's the seasonal thing. You end up finding the same, like, of the one good item from M+, like 3 times an expansion.
IQD wants a word.
Yeah. IQD, File,
Ruby,
Publik has some comments.
I mean, and like this
Ruby,
is also, it's hard. It's hard because I like that some part of my BIS list comes from Mythic Plus. Like that is, I do like that aspect on paper, but in practice, it feels like shit. And a lot of that's because the raid trinkets are garbage for the most part, and they have been, right? So that doesn't help either. But yeah.
But also, it's the same thing. Like, it's not like you're going into a different dungeon each like tier comes around. You're like,
hey, the affix changed.
Guess I'm back to that one.
Hold up,
Just-
isn't Shadow Priest still after
token-
changeling? Or
But tokens alleviate that
yeah.
too. If you had, instead of having all of these trinkets, like you've got a healer trinket, a tank trinket, a DPS trinket, a caster trinket in a dungeon, why isn't it just an Arden Wield trinket token that anyone can get, that they can trade around from those two dungeons? Now you aren't farming one dungeon, you're farming two dungeons, and anyone can trade it around.
Hire this man.
I mean, yeah. Totems fix a lot of things. Tokens.
All right. Well, is this the time where we go into that juicy or how we dug into
we
it?
kind of are talking about endgame systems when we're talking about raid gear acquisition
And progression.
and to be fair, like we'd never have enough time because there are a couple of other issues that have been raised. Like you guys mentioned, whenever a Mythic Plus became a thing, we had the same loot every new patch with a higher eye level issue that is always going to be the case unless there's going to be a whole overhaul, which I don't see it happening, and at least not in a patch for instance, and unless we do get the tokens again that can alleviate some of that issue as well. But we are talking about end game systems, and what is exactly on the menu?
Well, a very brilliant mind wrote this. So, endgame systems and progression from a casual versus hardcore standpoint. Now, this is all based on a comment we received on one of the shows. On the game being needlessly complicated. Well, we kind of all know that. The age-old topic of endgame being either too hard or too unrewarding. Okay. So Flame wrote here he wants to approach it from the perspective of how long should it take for you to grind and to get end game stuff. Like, what we're talking about. We talked at the beginning, but we don't know how we're gonna get or when we're gonna get double legendaries, tier sets, and all of that. But like philosophically, right? How long should it take for you to grind and get the end game stuff? Did I read your thing?
Yeah, I mean, this mainly came into question when you put the shards of domination into perspective, because it's like 3 or 4 layers of looting to get the thing, and then all of the gear issues that you have.
Then upgrading it. Don't forget.
Yeah, so you have I don't know, X amount of gear issues in general, and then you have the shards of domination system, which is like a 3-pronged loot system, and you kind of apply all of those issues to each individual system as well. So it's just a little bit crazy. And it feels like with the daggers as well, and with Jathus as well, it feels like it's a hamster wheel with like a carrot on a stick. Like we keep having to do the content again and again, or do the raid in 3 different difficulties, or farm Mythic Plus all zeros and then go into Mythic Plus as well, or farm a +2 key to get the thing and get the Valor then to upgrade the thing. So it feels like there's just a lot of stuff to do for that one thing that you do. And I mean, everybody has been talking about just getting the thing, and it's like, Publik mentioned, I'm done, I'm finally done. When should that I'm done moment happen realistically? 2 months into the tier, 3 months into the tier? Never, because we're just endlessly grinding forever. Because we think back to Legion as well with the whatever it was called, where you constantly put points into it and it never ended, right? It just came. Yeah, the Convergence of Legion, or whatever it was called, the last thing that you put into your artifact weapon.
Crucible? I don't know.
I remember the one.
Netherlight.
Are they like Crucible?
Oh my
I don't know.
god.
Yeah, I mean,
The Concordance of Legion.
Concordance.
Concordance, there you go, yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah, that was the
to be honest, Netherlight was such a toxic system as well. Like,
Bro, it
rather
was so
people not
bad.
mention that.
I know that immediately once I mentioned it, someone would react really badly.
Yeah,
We should do a Legion system
Ultimate
review.
toxic system. Like, I'm sorry, I can trade this relic, but I will not. I will go and put it in the Netherlight Crucible to see if it drops
maybe
something
it's
good.
better.
Oh god.
It's been 2 expansions now, so we can look at Legion of Rose-Tinted Glasses and call it the best expansion now, right?
Yeah.
Fuck that.
We're 1 expansion away from BFA being amazing.
I think back on track though. I think honestly, there's too much time gating with grinds these days, and I think they should just remove them. I think you should open up the grind from the get-go and just let players do it on their own time whenever they're ready to do it. None of this like 3-month time gating crap. Like, just give players what they want and let them go nuts if they want to push for world first, or they just like the content. Just let them do it from day one, and that inherently opens up and makes everything more alt friendly. You don't have to worry about catch ups and trading progress when everyone is on the same level. Like just give every character access to everything from day one and call it a day. I don't think time gating has done any favors for any part of the community, whether it's casual mythic rating or world first rating or anything. I think it just puts more friction in systems than excitement.
See, I'm on the
From
opposite
a
here.
casual perspective, there's another problem as well, which is that there's too many systems introduced all at once every time. Too many different things to grind at the same time. And as a result, you just feel overwhelmed and give up, kind of thing. It's like you're not even going to bother with the time gating, because by the time it matters, you're already gone.
Yeah. Like just Ding right now, there's so much shit you have to like get your head around all of a sudden. Especially if you're like new to this genre or how WoW works in general. Like digging max level now is so overwhelming.
I tried recruiting somebody back in November. Like recruiting somebody to WoW. They lasted a week and a half at level 60 before giving up. And that was
that's a big
while
issue.
giving them the legendary base piece, like for free kind of thing. Now imagine if you also have to farm the gold to get that, while also caring about Renown, Covenant, what's best, Mythic Plus, learning the dungeons, learning the raids, doing the whole Shards of Domination dance, figuring out how things work, doing the campaign, unlocking Korthia, because Korthia doesn't unlock automatically, not being able to swap Covenants, because you need to have a main to be able to do that.
Grinding
It's a
Torghast.
nightmare for a new player.
Well, I think what Publik mentioned kind of came to light in 915 when they made... My best example for this is Torghast, because prior to 915, you couldn't get as many legendaries as you could. You had a strict amount of time because you could only do the 2 wings per
God.
week.
Could you ask Guiltyas if he played all the druid specs? Because I'm curious. On my druid, when I played in 9-1, I had, I think, 9 legendaries. It was like, and they were all like minimum item level because I couldn't like get all of them properly. It was ridiculous.
Yeah,
man.
I did 200 Torghast wings that week.
Jesus Christ. But I think
like the system just totally disincentivized you to play other characters and even to play an alt spec.
Yeah.
Like I got like in Legion, I think I maintained like 10 characters just because it was fun. And the artifact weapons were cool and there wasn't a whole lot of weekly maintenance, to be honest. At least at the beginning. I mean, depending on the time in the expansion. But now it's like, I don't even want to play my alt because I know I'm going to have to jump into Torghast for, I don't know, 3 hours or something. And that just sounds awful. Yeah.
What I really, really dislike about the current situation, which is what the comment that you were referring to in that video alludes to, is that you need a guide to know how to interpret a guide. Because you don't know whether or not the system that people talk about from a certain pack is now defunct or irrelevant. There is no way of knowing whether or not Anima is pointless or Korthia is pointless.
Should I do my mod dailies?
Like all of these things, they were really important once upon a time, but do you know whether or not they are? Because they've still got pages. Torghast has still got pages. Do you really know? You need someone to tell you whether or not that's something that you can just ignore. And that's really, really bad for a returning player. A returning player should be like, I've logged on, this is the stuff that I'm told to go and do by this quest, and this quest is baiting me into wasting 6 hours of my time.
I'd like to bring a very concrete point on that one, where one of the systems is relevant, but not really relevant, but then again relevant for new players. The whole Grateful Offering shit. So, Grateful Offerings are from the Anima Conductor in your Covenant Sanctum, and it's used mostly for cosmetic stuff, like transmog, mounts, whatever. But more importantly, you can also buy a legendary recipe book for 35 of them. Now, for a new player, that's both really good and really bad, because they can't unlock Korthia until they've done the entire campaign. So if they can't be bothered basically power farming about 12 hours of quests, followed by doing Korthia and then finding a group to power farm rifts, which is not something that is very, it's not going to be evident for a new player to do this, then that's the only way they have to get Nathria legendaries, because LFR groups don't run anymore.
And like this is what happens when you introduce mini systems with every patch that don't carry over to the next patch. And I think we've seen that to like in BFA as well, and now this expansion to like massive degrees where things just don't carry over. Where, you know, and I think that's the struggle, and it seems like that's kind of happening again in 9.2 with like Torghast is kind of being abandoned. I think, at least in terms of player power progression, and it seems like it's going away. Which, you know, some people are kind of happy about, but it's also like, okay, well, now there's another like old system that doesn't, you know, kind of is useful but isn't. But you know, there's just a lack of transitions.
There's really
very
worried
little,
about
like-
where they're going to put the conduit stuff, if there is any.
There's very little telegraphing to a new player as to what it is that you need to go and do right now, and that makes the game needlessly complex. And like Panthea wants to talk about this, so I'll toss it over after. But like that leads to someone having all of these quests in their log, and they're all saying, "Do me now. These are really important." But only one of them is the one that actually matters. Like if you logged in WoD in Hellfire, it was really simple. You knew that you had to go to Tanaan. You need to do Tanaan, get some gear, and do Hellfire, and that was it. That was your path, A to Z, and it wasn't complicated.
The way the game's kind of gone is that it's kept trying to make everything evergreen, but the way the game was in the past, it was like, do the new shit. Everything else doesn't matter. Which is both good and bad, because, you know, there's good aspects from it in terms of if you want to replay the content, you know, Paragon chests are actually quite good for this, to keep world quests relevant, or to keep your emissaries or callings or whatever they want to call them relevant, so that you can keep doing them, get something for doing it. It keeps you engaged in the content, and you know that's good, that's healthy. As a new player coming into the game, it's pointless fluff. This is stuff that you do at the end of your game. Is kind of new game plus. It's not part of the main game. But there's nothing in the game to tell you that. It's leaning very heavily on core RPG systems of find your own way through the game. But there's nothing in the game to tell you how to find your own way. So you're just stumbling like you're going through uni and just drinking all the time. And then eventually working out maybe a bottle of vodka isn't a good breakfast.
Hey, you know, you gotta give us that guy something right about.
Hey, I object to that remark, fans.
This is educational at its best.
Guilty was looking
It's like you
confused.
can-
Wait, it's not?
When you look at the poor person who logs in, like right now, today, they log in, they get all of that stuff, and they've been told, hey, raiding's really fun, Mythic Plus is really fun, PvP is really fun. This is the stuff that you're going to get to go and do eventually. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Just, I don't know, this is all the stuff that's there. Find it, and maybe you'll get there, or maybe you'll just get bored and quit. That's it. Those are the two options.
Yeah,
Because if you look at the in-game path to get into raiding, it's LFR, where everyone's toxic, rage quitting, or you just can't even get raid groups together. And then you're left on your own. And it's like, okay, what's the next difficulty? Okay, let me try that. Oh, I'm not getting in, getting declined, getting declined, getting declined. Your option there is to create the group. You're not confident to create the group, so you're done. That's your game complete.
This is assuming you don't have a guild to do
I
the...
mean, a new player probably won't. I mean, a lot of kind of leveling guilds or so won't raid together or anything. They'll just chat, talk about the days, and log off.
Have you tried applying to a heroic guild? They will ask you for logs nowadays. Like, I'm not even kidding.
I've looked at the requirements of some like heroic guilds that haven't even cleared the raid, and they are much stricter than my guild's requirements.
hello.
Just for the record, how high are you? Like, for the audience.
This tier, world rank 230. Last tier, 125.
Ooh, respect.
So, yeah. I mean, I sent you a couple of things from other guilds as well that had the same thing. Like, they're basically having people really, really monitor what their raiders are doing for normal mode. And you're like, excuse me, what?
Yeah.
That's how far this has bled into. Like, the hyper-optimized spreadsheets that people made for fun or for, like, a good reason, say in Legion or BFA, where they were tracking how much AP you farmed in a day, how many islands you did. That stuff had a reason for them, but everyone has now started doing it. when it's completely not important. Like, you don't need to know how many world quests Jim did today. It's not important. But they still do it anyway. And they hold it over people.
Yeah.
And I wonder if
regarding
too, if like the
islands-
pool of raiders has shrunk as we've gotten along the years now, and they're just, people are kind of graduating out of the content or kind of moving on to other games now or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to echo back to the island spreadsheet, because that's a really good example. The really high-end guilds were using the island stuff because the innermost tier of Azerite was a net defensive gain for everybody in the raid. Like, the resounding protection stuff was basically, like, it saved people in some fights.
It was an extra healer, essentially.
Yep, effectively. So that had a very valid purpose, but it wasn't to basically for people to not slack. It was because there was a very valid reason at that kind of level. To a heroic guild, that makes no sense.
And I think, like you guys mentioned, this all comes down to the fact that the game is just needlessly complex with systems layered on top of systems as well. And I'm not sure, although this could be a topic for the next video, but I'm not sure if this, do you guys see this as a symptom of the game becoming a seasonal based game, which it takes me back to a dev Q&A interview that Ian had back in BFA, where they were talking about Titan Forging and why there's this big eye level gap between patches, which creates issues like we have today with like Sanctum of Domination, because there's a big power spike in between each patch. And the argument that was made by Ian then, and I can see it as still a valid argument, although I don't agree with it, the fact that they want us as players to feel like when we loot something, it's impactful and we can see the increase in numbers, hence why every patch has a big power spike for players. And this introduces the content being kind of seasonal, because whenever a new patch rolls out, pretty much everything that you've looted in the past patches becomes irrelevant to a point, because it's just way weaker than what you get, and then you farm the same trinket and same gear again, or Azerite back in BFA as well. And then it creates this weird wheel or loop where now in 9.2 we need to feel the increase in power, and we're going to lose the Sanctum shards as well. So we need to feel like the boost in power. So either everything's going to be incredibly overpowered or not. But then invalidating content.
I don't think it's a seasonal thing there. It's that almost explicitly ties to acquisition. If you have to re-get the same trinket every season that they release, it's not good. But if it takes you a day, a week to re-get it in the new season, versus it takes you 2 weeks, a month to get it, maybe more, those are huge gulfs in what it actually does. If it's just, it's a new season, I go get my new item, happy day, that's fine. It's over. Where they cause the problems is when they make it excessively treadmill.
And I think it's just a lack of polish, honestly, because like they can fix this by just saying, hey, if you get Keystone Master for a given season, you can just go buy whatever trinket you want. Like, it's just there, or like put whatever rating requirement you want on the next season. And it's just like, okay, you're done. Like, you've shown your demonstration to finish the content. Here you go. Like, sorry that RNG didn't favor you. Like, it's okay. Like, we got your back. And you can fix that. Like, that's pretty easy to do. And they've done something similar with like Valor vendors in the past, right? So I don't know. I don't think it's like too off the rails to say that. I think the big issue with gear complexity is that there's too much going on. Like, we can go back to basics where it was just like, okay, the main focus of an expansion is your class, your spec. We're going to put all of this time into making that as good as it can be. And yeah, there will be tier sets. That's it. And maybe there's one legendary in the entire game, whatever it is. I don't know. And I think they've shown their ability to do that in the past, like, relatively well. And I would love to go back to a state where it's like, yeah, the only player power bonus we're getting from tier to tier is the new tier set, which, I personally, I know some people didn't like it, but I always enjoyed kind of mixing and matching tier sets at the start of a tier as like a transition element into it. Like, I'll wear 2 set of this, 2 set of the new one, or 2 and 4 set, whatever it is, right? We could go back to something like that, but it would require them to kind of stop designing 5 systems every patch and kind of just revolve on the ones that they already have, which are our classes and specs.
The core problem is that there's always an extra one on top of tiers. Like tiers just existing is really, really fine. It's when there's all these other loops that someone has to worry about, and it just causes like decision paralysis for someone. And if you have 100 players, and if each one of the systems cuts 10 of those players from enjoying, suddenly instead of having 100, you have like 30. And no wonder the raiding population goes down, because now there's like 7 different instances where you just cut 10 players at a time, and the raid community dwindles because of it.
Every time a system's added, it's kind of seen as the most important thing you need to do to progress your character right now. But every single one of these systems is that as well. So then you have the scenario of the Heroic Progress Guild that's hyper-focusing on every single one of these as the reason on how they can improve as a team. But yeah,
and I think that's fine to an extent. Like the game is very trickle down, right? Where it's like the high end community does something, everyone else wants to do it, because like part of the reason a lot of us play this game is for that they want to min-max their character as much as possible, and that's what they like doing in the game. But Blizzard just makes that style just not fun for a good chunk of the player base now, which is unfortunate.
It's also down to PR and communication. Like we're seeing it. Well, Panthea and I are mostly seeing it on Acros at the moment, where we have all the people that are progressing Sylvanas coming in at the moment. And they're all, like, their first port of call is, well, do I need a better covenant to not die? Whereas Sylvanas is a very, very binary fight overall. Like, you do it right, you survive. You don't do it right, you die, kind of thing. Your covenant has basically no impact. But it's because they've been, like, for, 3 patches now? All the communication from Blizzard has been regarding covenants. All of it. It's always covenant focused all the time.
That's not just Shadowlands. So this is extended since, I would say, almost since Legion, where every new thing is the new thing that is super important. You have to do it. It is the vital thing is that you need to cap your artifact. You need to get Azerite. You need to cap your neck. You need to get essences. And if you don't get essences, that's the reason you're doing bad. It's not not your play. It's not your experience. It's nothing else. It's that you didn't do the grind. And that's almost always unhealthy, because a lot of the time that's not the factor. It's something else, but it distracts from it. And it makes someone feel like they're being pushed into doing something that they don't need to do. They could just play the game and be a bit better.
And this is actually a funny transition, if you want, to the Mage Tower system. And like,
I was almost going to say that.
Like one of the reasons the Mage Tower, I think, was initially successful, we don't necessarily need to talk about the time walking version, is that it forced you to play your class and spec differently, or in ways you haven't in the past. And now with its resurgence, people are like, wait a second, I lost all of my borrowed power. What is even happening with my class and spec? Like, how do I play this game? And it kind of is like showing the problem, the core problem of the game, I think, which is that all of this time and effort they used to spend in classes and specs is now in these borrowed power systems that last for a patch.
I was going to go in a different direction of thinking, like, when time walking drags you down to like a reasonably templated format, like time walking 1 is a really good example of that now, where people wanted to find ways where they could make it easier. It's a lot better if you just give them a blank slate and they say, there's nothing else that you need to grind. There's no secret. There's no trick. It's just you and the fight. And that's it.
Yeah, I meant that, like, with the Mage Tower, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to change my talents to like adapt to this boss. And you guys were saying that, like, oh yeah, like if you're trying to progress Sylvanas, it's like, yeah, it's very binary, right? But before, I felt like there was a bit more like talent agency of like what you could do with your class and spec to like handle certain situations. And now it's like, oh yeah, everyone's just running the same build for every fight, and that's just how it is.
That's also to do with kind of talents being very binary in how they're made, where there is only one option because it's oppressively strong, or the other 2 options are so weak that they don't even need to be in the game. It's a waste of space on your hard drive.
Well, that calls back to like the at least the last, if not both last podcast, is that talents have almost become the secondary system when, let's be honest, they should be the absolute primary.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like that should be the baseline of like how systems work.
No, but just circling back to what Publik said in regards to, like, there was a time where the path basically you had was, you dinged max level, you started doing, I don't know, heroic dungeons, heroic raiding, whatever, you started getting slowly your gear, then you get your tier sets, and then you kind of moved it into the in-game and mythic raiding or whatever, and that was kind of it. And then you would move on to maybe a different spec within your class, or a different class altogether. And that was fine. That worked beautifully for a number of expansions. That's that simple take. I would say that with all the problems and questions 9.2 has gave birth to, the fact that shards are going away, I can still see it as a positive. It's
Can
still
I just chime in quickly?
Sure, go ahead.
Specifically in relation to both Shadowlands and BFA, is I think that the emergence of there being Google Docs that appear just before a patch launches, telling you all of the things that you have to do week one, and there is one for every single patch. I shit you not, where it will tell you, you need to do this, and this is your checklist, and if you don't do it, you are behind for the rest of the patch.
Yeah, I mean,
those existing kind of highlight how bad the patch launches feel for the average person.
it's true. This is why we also do like patch guides, and whenever we do those on the channel, we're always amazed on how many fucking things you have to checklist. And this is on a casual level. This is on basically, okay, you just need to understand what the fuck is going on in order to get by. Not even talking about how you get to like being prepared for plus 18s and higher, and mythic rating, and not. So it is fair point. But yeah, I was just trying to underline the fact that if 9.2 is just tier sets and double legendaries, with all of the problems and questions we have for those, and I think they said that they will not further iterate on covenants. I mean, Renown 80 will be Renown 80.
There's no new soulbind traits or anything
nothing like that. So
no new conduits as far as we know. There's probably, and what they haven't said, and this is a lot of assumptions that I think myself and maybe other theory crafters have made, is that we are going to get new conduit ranks.
There's enough in the database for 3 more, which is a tier's worth.
But again, we don't know how this is being acquired, so like a lot of this is like super wishy-washy. But yeah, I would love to step into 9.2 to your point and be like, yeah, Torghast, totally optional content. You can do it if you want. There's maybe some cosmetic rewards, whatever. There's the new outdoor zone. Again, totally cosmetic. Doesn't hamper your progression at all if you decide not to do it. But if you want to, it's there. Yeah. And I would love to just log in and get my double legendaries and upgrade my conduits and, get into raid and mythic plus. But I'm scared that they'll not do that.
Biggest fears regarding 9.2 is they've pinky promised that there will not be player power in the Cypher of the First One's mechanic. The whole, you learn things and you can interact with world stuff and all that.
Yeah.
But they have not confirmed that there is no player power in Zereth Mortis.
I mean, I know there's
really
player power within the zone, but...
Yeah. So
I would just really like them to commit to letting there be a piece of content that doesn't directly tie into being mandatory.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even mind if there's some part of it that's mandatory. Like, to give you an example, I liked Mechagon. The way Mechagon worked was pretty good.
But having something where if you dabble in it a bit and you get the lion's share of what it is, that's good.
Yeah.
Where everything is at the very end, where you have to absolutely poop sock and do all of it, that is not good.
Korthia was the worst thing they've done. Like, you felt incentivized to kill every rare all the time, every day, and do all the dailies, and basically hang out and actually shit on people if they pulled consumption while it was on 61 rare as opposed to 62 rare. It was the ultimate in toxicity on that one, and just because you wanted that rank 6.
Not even like wanted it. It was just like you're like, I guess like because we're trying to min-max our characters, right? I want that socket. I want the conduit upgrades. All this stuff that was like, I want it, but do I act? And like that was my guild is like, do I really want it though? Like is it worth it? I mean, I don't know. It's not fun.
No, that loops even more so that if it's really, really important for one person and they spend all their time doing it, then you feel bad because even though it's not that important for you, you should be putting in the same effort, right?
Now there's a rift in your guild of like the people that have done it and wasted their life doing it versus the people that haven't, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that causes like the grievance of, look at this lazy person. Why do I even want to? Why should he be here? And then
and I've had people quit over that
social brackets,
because they're like, hey guys, I can't dedicate 2 weeks of my life farming Korthia or like hitting Korthia every day. I can't do that. I come to raid with everyone a couple days a week, and that's what I have time for. But I don't have time to farm some boring zone for 12 hours,
and
whatever.
It's so
it is.
boring.
2 hours
Still.
fucking 2 hours a day for a whole entire week.
Yeah. It's like, and you know what? And it sucks because I lost a lot of good friends with that, and it's like that stinks. But and that's what we were given. So hopefully it's not the same thing 9.2, but we don't know yet.
I think it should just be the metric going forward. Those kind of things need to stop.
I chose to completely ignore Korthia for
I'm
this
so
season
proud of you.
content
I'm so
because
proud of you.
the power gain from sockets is so minimal this patch.
You're a tank.
Or even for DPS, like if you played a cloth DPS, you gained one socket. What's the point?
That was the other fun part about shards we forgot to complain about was that depending on your spec or your gear spec, if your cloth plate, whatever, you lost sockets like haste gems or whatever. So yeah, Korthia is much less useful for you. So.
It's not even just
3 sockets,
It's not just the Shadowlands thing though. Like I personally, I lost one of our best tanks that I've ever played with, and a really good friend. He just doesn't play the game anymore because he decided that I'm not farming islands. Like fuck that. I'm not grinding out essences. That's boring. And then a few other people were like, well, why is he even here then if he's not putting the effort in? Why don't we just kick him? And he just at a certain point decided, well, whatever. I'm not dealing with that, and he left. And that, I'm positive, is really common across a lot of guilds, especially lower ones.
Not even, I mean, I don't know. Like, my guild isn't super big. I mean, we killed Sylvanas in like October or something, but like, we've lost like 15 raid members from 9.1 to 9.2. And it's just like, what is happening? Like,
this actually hurts the most in the world, like 400 to 1,000 kind of region, because there you have
they
people
start believing that
they believe that they need it. They will literally push each other, bully each other to get first to rank 6 and that kind of garbage. That leads to burnout. There's no better way to burn people out than to bully them into doing stuff.
And there's such a huge variance of like what people expect to do in those guilds.
Yep. I mean, look at the blanket rules that some guilds have where you had to have 252 conduits. You're a frost mage, sure, no problem. Like, each rank of IC prop is what? 1.3 to 1.4k DPS. You're a blood DK and it's like 0.4, 0.5% maximum between 252 and not having the conduit.
You probably got more value out of the defensive ones for most specs, I think, than you did the offensive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I think like that's kind of, and it's hard because like obviously this is a social problem, but I think Blizzard has proven they're not good at handling those social problems in the game, and I think they've kind of gotten out of hand, like power infusion and other external buffs. Like they're not good at designing systems and designing a game that it kind of make these social problems less often to happen or less likely to happen. And I think it's kind of gotten out of hand.
They've got to the point where I don't know if they realize just how much they create the reason that those social problems occur. It's not that the player base is inherently evil and going out of their way to make people be really nasty to each other. It's that the game sets it up to fall. They're already there. If they didn't exist, it wouldn't happen.
And I think it is their responsibility to fix.
Yeah, I agree. At this point, not 100%, but I'd say generously 50-50 is a case where they need to start removing the extremes, and the people need to be a little less excessive as to telling people that you have to do these things as well.
Yep. I think stuff needs to give on both sides, right? But I think putting external buffs in the game and removing master loot and like doing things like this, I think you're just you're just increasing the social tension in a game that doesn't need it. So
listening to you guys, and in the spirit of keeping this constructive as well, in the case that people with any sort of power can make any changes based on what we're discussing here, it sounds like a lot of these issues started with Legion when they raised the bar, and Legion was maybe a better implementation of all of this external power systems on top of systems as well, and it wasn't as crazy as it is now. But probably after Legion, they feel like they need to double down on that. And then we had Azerite, and now we have all of this that were going on. And hopefully, with the speculation and hints that we get, maybe 10.0 is going to be different in this regard as well. But from what I understand so far is it's needlessly complicated. And because it's needlessly complicated and we need players to have some kind of power, people have devised these spreadsheets and Google Docs as well, because there's like 10 different paths that you can take your character to grind all these little increments of power that add up to like a decent chunk. Yeah, and gated as well. That it's without that, people don't get the strength, and that's maybe why, even though unnecessarily heroic and normal guilds or people who, let's say, wouldn't get as much out of grinding 10,000 islands per day, still do it because that would be the only way to get the power as well. So I think doubling down on the complexity of the game and the layers of systems, or let's say the mechanical death of the game, can be doubled down. I think a lot of these issues could be solved potentially, and I don't know if this is going to happen in 9.2 unless they just pull the plug or pull the ripcord on a lot of stuff. Give us gear tokens to bypass the fact that we have 3 different types of content and each of them is balanced differently, and the one bonus that we get from A is not that good in B. Obviously, not let stuff like Torghast be still relevant into crafting legendary. I'm not sure. I know Publik mentioned this as well, but I'm not sure if Torghast is still going to be necessary for the first ranks of legendary. Because
it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, they did say that.
So if you want to upgrade, you don't have to do Torghast anymore, I think.
Yeah, so I think doubling down on all
they're
of
adding the other thing with Torghast is they're adding something that is what Torghast should have originally been, which is just a piece of side content. Yeah, it's just something that you go and do for fun. Mm-hmm. That is like a prestige thing. That's the kind of avenue of content that these things should be exploring. Not that it has to be part of the treadmill to make people do something that we put effort into. Because if you put effort into it, it should be good, and people will do it regardless.
I was just going to say that I think these are all solved problems, and this is, I think, what's particularly frustrating is that these are not new things that we've had in the game, and they've had these in the before, and they've solved them, right? And I think they've just artificially gone back on design choices they've made in the past that we have liked. Like islands were bad, right? Because of they for whatever reason time gated your power with artifact knowledge, right? If artifact knowledge wasn't a thing and you just got all of that power immediately, then you could just do a couple islands on the first week of the patch and be done, and then move on to your next character. But the fact that they try to elongate relevancy of content, either on purpose or not, with time gating and with scaling of values and things like that, I think it just leads to burnout way faster than it has in the past, and leads people to be like, okay, I finished my main and I'm gonna move on, and I'll play other games now.
Islands is unquestionably the easiest example of them artificially extending it, where if you told someone at the beginning, that you do 500 islands and you're going to get your essence, right? You go do that, and it's totally important and it's really valuable. They won't do it. But if you told them you have to do 100 at any point, they'll go and do that. That's way less of a time commitment. But if you also tell them you either do 500 now or you wait a month and then you do 100, they're going to opt always for the 100 unless they really, really care. And it pressures people into doing the 500. Right. It also extends into all of the other things where they have latent content that no one cares about, where everyone still thinks it's really important. It's very much like, I know that this is a really big sentiment in Warframe, where there's sort of artifacts of old content pieces that no one cares about. And you get tricked into going to doing it, and everyone tells you it's important, but it's not. No one cares. And that's what the conduits are like.
Or mod dailies are still a thing, don't do them, but they're there.
Oh yeah, they're still there. What the fuck goes in the mall?
And also, speaking of systems that actually, in hindsight, I think were better than others. Like in the maw, you could go balls to the wall and clear a bunch of crap in the maw and go really efficient. But like the weekly was like far and beyond. Like if you can get the weekly done, like that's it. Like that's good enough for most people, I think. But they then kind of did away with that in Korthia, and the weekly part of Korthia was a much smaller portion of like your power that you could potentially grind out in the week. So I don't know. That's why I'm saying it feels like they kind of regress, or from patch to patch don't take the learnings that they've gotten and what went well and what didn't. Especially from patches.
Expansion to expansion too. They keep making the same mistake. Expansion after expansion.
And this is the thing. I don't think they would have been able to, because 100% they're aware, I think, of all of these complaints from top to bottom. I think from hardcore to casual. I think that all of this mess affects everybody. I don't think they would have had the time to address most of these things for 9.2. This is what I was saying in the beginning, that at least 9.2 has, from the looks of it, a clearer way with its we already discussed it, the concerns and questions and whatever, but it's a good steering way from at least 2 points. One, the fact that they appear to be communicating much more and letting us know much more than previous cycles of the game, I would say. And two, that at least there's not a piling of systems once again. So then again, I'm referring to shards. Okay, fuck shards. They're gone. We know that there's sets, there's legendaries, and we're gonna have still gonna have the covenants. If they're gonna upgrade the conduits, okay, whatever. But I think those, at least from these two standpoints, it's a good thing. But obviously, there's a lot more to talk about. But we shall wrap it up. Flame.
But this is I was letting you finish. There are a lot of topics that we can cover, and so we definitely have more to talk about. But I think this kind of sums up what we wanted to touch up on today. And unless you guys have anything else to add, I think we can definitely wrap this up.
It's definitely wrapping up for today, because topics will be forever, and mind you, this is going to be posted next Monday, so we're probably going to have some updates on the PTR and stuff
by then.
Yeah, for sure.
And by the time this is posted, we're going to be able to test every trinket and double legendary.
Oh yeah, there's a lot.
Maybe optimistic.
Honest.
Are we playing the same
Pinky
game?
promise.
We'll see. But once again, guys, be sure to check the description if you're watching this on YouTube, or even if you're listening to Spotify, go onto YouTube for the video of this podcast, and check out Guiltyas, Publik, Mandl, Panthea, and Wordup. All awesome fellas, big brains within the WoW community, and they care for the casuals as well. Trust me, I know they care. They are top players, but casual love all day long. And that being said, thank you so much for listening and watching. We'll catch everybody next Monday with a brand new show. We'll see if it's still Breaking WoW or another specific one.
Oh yeah, 100%.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Take it easy.
Later. Bye.
So.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.